Chapter 5 Fritha. For a second, Wolf remained utterly still. Behind him, across the beach, he had heard the monks still chanting. If he shouted for help, no one would hear. If he turned and ran, he might get a spear in his back, or one of those deadly small throwing knives his father had told him about. He waited helplessly, not knowing what to do. The eyes stared from the bush, and Wolf stared back. He stared so hard and so fiercely that suddenly the other eyes blinked. Once that had happened, they glanced away uneasily. The lashes fluttered with a kind of nervousness. Wolf began to grin. His heart stopped hammering, and he just relaxed. He scrambled up the remaining few yards toward the bush. At once there was a scurry. The eyes vanished. The bush rocked and waved as someone began to struggle out of hiding. Wolf had an impression of waving arms and flying feet. He easily overtook them and pounced. There was a strangled cry, and he snapped in a menacing conqueror's voice, "Be silent!" His captive squirmed and twisted and gasped, but made no attempt to call out again. Still holding on to wrists that tugged vainly in his grip, Wolf overbalanced and fell on his knees. But he still hung on, and in a second they were both on the ground. Then the prisoner began to cry. "Be silent," Wolf said again, but he could not help grinning. There was not much glory in overcoming a girl no bigger than himself, but it was a relief not to have to deal with one of her older brothers or perhaps her father. He still hung on because there was something about her crying that he did not entirely trust. He could see no tears. When Anna cried without tears, it was because she wanted to trick him. How art thou named?" he demanded. The crying ceased. She frowned. She wiggled back so that she was sitting on her heels and stared at him in a puzzled fashion. "How art thou named?" He sounded impatient, and indeed he felt impatient. Impatient and slightly worried. "Come speak, girl, lest I strike thee." To his fury, she burst out laughing. He let her hands go as though she had spat at him. He was now more than merely worried. He was utterly bewildered. "Why dost thou seem so mirthful, girl?" At which she covered her face with her hands and collapsed into convulsive giggles. Wolf felt helpless and angry. She was a skinny little thing with hair so fair it was almost white. It could do with a combing, he thought. In spite of the manner of their meeting and her mockery now, she was somehow not at all unfriendly. But what was he to do if she would not answer when he spoke to her, if she merely burst out laughing at the very sound of his voice? He tried, "Be silent," again, for she had seemed to understand that. She she still did so, for she stifled her laughter. But she had lost her awe of him. That much was clear. For a glorious moment at the very beginning he had been a conqueror. Now he was quite clearly almost an equal. If things went on at this rate, he would soon be her inferior. He stared at her silently, afraid to open his mouth. He decided he would have to take her to his father and brother Sylvanus and see if they could make her listen to plain sense. It was very disheartening for him. The first time he spoke his own tongue in his own country to his own countrywoman to meet with nothing but mocking laughter. He rose. He did his best to look and sound commanding. "Come." She hesitated a second, then scrambled to her feet. She understood that word, which was something. Perhaps she was a little lacking in wits and only understood very simple words. He did not believe it. She looked very far from witless to him. He reached out and took her hand, and she allowed him to do so, but when he moved off leading her, she hesitated. "Come." He was growing impatient. He held on to her hand, but this was a mistake, for she began to struggle. She scratched at his wrist with her free hand, but he managed to get her away from the shelter of the bushes and out on the slope, from which they could see the monks gathered in a little crowd with their supplies about them. Wolf pointed, and the girl looked across the beach in silence, and perhaps fear, for she tried to wiggle free. "Behold," Wolf pointed again, "behold where noble men pray to their God." At that, in spite of her struggles, she gave the loudest laugh of all and nearly fell down again. She was so doubled up with mirth. He was so annoyed that he let her go. He could no longer be bothered with her. He turned his back and swung off across the shore. As he went, he heard a man's voice calling, "Fritha!" He was somewhere out of sight. "Where are you, Fritha? Daughter!" Wolf swung around. The girl was still staring at him. She made a face at him, then turned on her heel, calling as she went, "Here, coming, coming, father." As she ran off and disappeared over the rising ground, almost immediately she reappeared with a man beside her and pointed excitedly down the beach. Wolf was more puzzled than ever. The man had called, and she had answered in the language he knew to be his own. Certainly she had answered briefly, ungracefully perhaps, but if he understood her, why would she not understand him? Feeling thoroughly baffled, Wolf rejoined the monks. Wolfstan looked up sharply as the boy approached. Where have you been? Do not leave the rest till we know more. It is too quiet here. It is not natural. Perhaps they are arming themselves. What are we to do now, father? Wolf saw that the stores were being taken up and the monks were moving off across the shingle. We shall make camp for the night. Brother Sylvanus will go with letters to the king. Does he know the way? He will ask it, replied Wolfstan shortly. Wolf was aware that his father was worried, but nonetheless he could not help smiling, for he had a quick vision of Brother Sylvanus courteously inquiring the way of some peasant and being greeted with gales of laughter. Father, just now something very strange happened to me. Wolf got no further, for there was a sudden commotion among the monks, who were pointing and exclaiming in great agitation. Across the beach came the man Wolf had already seen, accompanied by half a dozen more. They carried thick wooden staves. Behind them on the skyline could be seen an assortment of people, men and women and children of all ages and sizes. Augustine moved at once to the head of his brethren and stood waiting. He held his hands at his sides, that all might see he carried no weapon. He called to the rest to do the same. Brother Sylvanus, stand by me to be my interpreter. Wolfstan, these are your own blood. Speak to them. Wolfstan stepped ahead of the rest. He called out to the approaching men, We are all friends. I greet my countrymen. Wolf put his fingers in his ears so that he could not hear the laughter that must surely come. But nothing happened. The first man, whom the girl had called father, stepped a pace or two forward in his turn. Where is your ship? Sailed home again. We only are left here on the shore. Tell us where we may shelter. The man looked from Wolfstan to Augustine and back again. Who is your leader? Brother Sylvanus at once stepped forward. He had a good rich voice, and it rang confidently. Hearest thou, friends? Behold our leader, who comes with tidings of great joy. When thou hearest him, he broke off, for the men looked from one to the other among themselves and smiled, then half laughed and stifled the laughter as well as they could. Are you kings? Demanded the first man, still smiling into his beard. Only kings speak thus, only kings long dead. And now he laughed out loud. Nay, friend, began Brother Sylvanus, trying not to frown. Wolfstan broke in without apology. No, he said, not kings, but they have a message from the King of Kings, and they seek your King Ethelbert, who must hear it before any of you. The 6 men stopped laughing and conferred together. At last their leader spoke again. I am Siniag. I am a farmer like all these here. If you seek the king, you seem to come in peace. Let him be judge of that. There is a good yard where you can shelter. Send to the king and stay here guarded until his answer comes. Wulfstan then interpreted this to Augustine, who nodded his agreement. With Wulfstan constantly acting as a go-between, the monks took up the stores and other supplies and the coffer with the holy books and set off behind Siniag. At the tail of the procession, Wolf, with a sack of meal on his shoulders, tagged along frowning. He could not understand why his father was able to talk to Siniag and the others, while brother Sylvanus and his best pupil, whose style had been much praised, were met with outbursts of laughter. Suddenly he found someone walking a little way behind him. He looked over his shoulder and saw the fair-haired girl. I am Fritha, you? Wolf. If she could only manage words of one syllable, he had better reply in the same way. But the matter nagged at him. Why kings? He demanded. Why long dead kings? It is in the songs. The bards sing tales of kings who speak so. But they are all dead, all dead. And she imitated him, giggling as she did so. How art thou named? The explanation began to struggle through Wolf's confusion of mind. Brother Sylvanus, when he was Eobald, had been a chieftain's son. He had never spoken in Wulfstan's blunt, rough way. Wulfstan had been pleased when Wolf went to learn from Brother Sylvanus to hear this grander speech. But Wolf's lessons had been based on the poems and songs and legends that Brother Sylvanus remembered hearing sung and told by the bards in his father's hall. Gradually, in the years during which he had heard no other of his own countrymen, Brother Sylvanus had fallen entirely into the old poetic way of speech, the speech of long-dead kings, as Siniag had said, handing Wolf, as it were, the key to the mystery. A great deal must be unlearned, Wolf realized. He told himself soberly, if he would have to keep his wits about him. It was not at all pleasant to be laughed at least of all by a tow-headed girl. Show me the way, he commanded, for the rest had vanished while he stopped to talk. Come on, make haste. Frithia smiled. It is better when you are a boy and not a dead king. This way, Wolf. And she ran skippingly ahead of him. Her fair hair danced on her shoulders, but it was still dreadfully rough and tangled. Once Wolf had made his mother a comb out of bone for a present. It was possible he might do as much for Frithia if she behaved herself and did not laugh at him any more. In the camp they made within the farmer's stockade, Wolf, as usual, helped Brother Adrian with the cooking. But that was not his only task. His father had gone with Brother Sylvanus once the language difficulty was realized, and Wolf was thus the only one in the camp who could speak with any fluency to the English. This he did carefully, but with increasing success. Certainly it was much easier, if uglier, than what he had learned from Brother Sylvanus during the years in Rome. He was beginning almost to chatter with Frithia. Now that she had stopped laughing, she was helpful and kind. He could tell her about Anna and know she would listen, and because she too had no mother, though it was many years since her death, they were much in sympathy. He told her how his father had been taken and put up for sale in the Roman marketplace, and how Pope Gregory had given him his freedom. And he told her about Rome and the way life went there, till her eyes were round with astonishment. Wolf suspected she had had little idea that any other places existed beyond the shore on the south, the forests and hills to north and east and west, but she knew where the king lived. He lives in Canterbury. Where? Wolf frowned. It is called Cantiacorum Durovernum. Cantiacorum, that's its full name. Now you are talking like an old man again. First a dead king, now an old man. Well, the old men call it Cantia, what you said. That was what the Romans called it. Who? The Romans, stupid. Haven't you ever heard of them? The Romans from Rome, where my home was, where Anna is still. 300 years they lived here and looked after this place and built great buildings. If they had not had to go because of troubles in their own country, he thought, invaders would not have come and destroyed the cities and the faith that had been brought to the people. They're not here now, said Frithia, dismissing the Romans. Only us. This country is our country. Wolf was torn in two. He had been so sure he was every inch of him a native to this country. Yet Frithia had only to speak lightly of the Romans for him to bristle into defense. It was almost a relief to end the conflict by answering Brother Adrian's call to help with the bread making. It was not many miles from the coast to the king's palace at Cantiacorum, for, or must it be Canterbury or Cantuar, as they now heard it called. When 2 days passed and the deputies did not return, the brethren grew very uneasy. They had been set up and murdered, mark my word. The king mistrusts them and is questioning them. Or he has thrown them into a prison. Or he delights in disputing with them and will not let them go. Father Abbot, what if we are all to be made martyrs before our message is given? God's will be done, my children, but I know it is not so. He spoke not presumptuously, but in the confidence of his own great faith. It was on the third day that one of the youngest monks cried out that he saw a cavalcade approaching. Everyone crowded to where he was standing on rising ground, from which they could look toward the northeast above the stockade. There, sure enough, was the dust of cantering horses, and they soon saw that 10 or a dozen riders were approaching. It was impossible, however, to make out if these were the returning messengers joined with some others, or a band of fighting men coming to take the invaders by force. I can see Brother Sylvanus's robes, cried the young monk whose sight was so good. Wolf pushed to his side. Do you see my father also? He could be any one of those 10 more. This cold wind makes my eyes water. There, I can see no more. Augustine now ordered that they leave the stockade, where only a pretense was made of guarding them, and go out in an orderly fashion to meet the cavalcade. A rough track wound from the farm up the hill. As they followed the track, they sang together, partly in piety, but partly to raise up their spirits, which were disturbed by the unknown. Wolf followed after the procession at a little distance. He saw that as they sang together, the monks were strengthened until their community was like a building with stout walls. From the windows of this building there seemed to shine forth many lights, for their faith was radiant, even if their human courage sometimes failed a little. As the procession reached the brow of the hill, the cavalcade was seen near at hand. Wolf forgot his manners and thrust past the file of singing brethren, intent only on finding his father. Someone caught him by the shoulder. To his horror, he found himself looking into the stern face of the father abbot. Wait, said Augustine. Do you not see the cross-bearer? A man of God is approaching. It is likely to be Bishop Leothard. The Queen's own chaplain has come to give us welcome. Keep your place, my child. Red in the face, Wolf dropped back again. And even when he saw Wulfstan safe and well, he managed to stay patiently where he was. He saw Brother Sylvanus, his face shining with content, hurry toward Augustine, then lead him to the head of the cavalcade. It was indeed the Queen's chaplain who had come to welcome Augustine to the kingdom of Kent. I am to greet you from the King Father Abbot, and from Queen Bertha, our most Christian lady. And I am to say this, that King Ethelbert has heard your message and respects it. Within a few days he will come himself to the Isle of Thanet and speak with you. Now God be praised, my lord, said Augustine. But I am to say that the meeting must be in some open place. At this, there was a confused murmur among the gathering about Augustine, but he remained calm. As the king pleases, my lord bishop. Father, said Leothard, there's a pagan land, and the king is bound to respect his own fears. It is though by his advisers that you may seek to work some magic on him. But this, by ancient superstition, you may not do so long as you do not meet beneath any roof. May God enlighten him, said Augustine. Behind him a slow silence settled over the light listening monks. Indeed, they were likely to enter upon a hard task in this barbaric place. Okay, guys, so that chapter was actually a pretty straightforward one. One of the words I thought that was repeated quite a few times in the beginning was mirth. It kept saying that the girl was looking at Wolf with mirth or mirthfully, she laughed at him or whatever. It is just meaning that she was amused by him. She was kind of making fun, like laughing in a haha, that's silly type of way. So she was obviously laughing at how he talked. He was talking in very old English, saying thou and thee, and she and her family and people don't talk like that. So they were laughing at his English. And then they also were laughing at Brother Sylvanus's English because he was talking the same way. So Wulfstan goes to be the interpreter because he speaks in regular people English, not the king's English as they were calling it. So they go and they talk to the king, and he says he's going to come visit them. So he's going to come to where they are, the King of Kent. So his wife, remember, is a Christian and he is a pagan, meaning not a Christian. And their land is pagan. They worship other gods or maybe no God. So he says he's going to come visit, but that he is superstitious, meaning he kind of believes in luck, and that they need to meet outside. So that's where the chapter ends, and we'll see what happens next.